where people stand. Donald Trump's Defense Secretary, Mark Esper, called Donald Trump a threat to democracy. John Kelly, his longest-serving chief of staff, said Donald Trump had nothing but contempt for our democratic institutions, the Constitution, and the rule of law. Even Bill Barr called Donald Trump a constant narcissist. Donald Trump's own vice president said, the American people deserve to know that President Trump asked me to put him over my oath to the Constitution of the United States. Anyone who puts himself over the Constitution should never be the President of the United States. His first Secretary of Defense, James Mad Dog Mattis. Donald Trump is the first president in my lifetime who does not try to unite the American people. He tries to divide the American people. His chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, retired General Mark Milley, said, we do not take an oath to a want-to-be dictator. We take an oath to the Constitution, and we take an oath to the idea that is America, and we're willing to die for it. Nikki Haley, who at one time, not now, but at one time, said a terrible thing happened on January the 6th, and he called it a beautiful day. Chris Christie said he was just out for himself. His second national security advisor, H.R. McMaster, said we saw the absence of leadership and what that can do to our country. John Bolton, another national security advisor, said foreign leaders think he is a laughing fool. And I can go on and on. Anthony Scaramucci, a former communications director, he is the domestic terrorist of the 21st century. I mean, again, go on. Elaine Chao quit after January the 6th. At a particular point of events, it's impossible for me to continue given my personal values and my my philosophy. So Claire McCaskill, we've been talking about, and you know, I think we need to do this on the Monday before. We didn't plan to do this because the debate was on Wednesday. We need to do it because when you see Donald Trump going out all weekend,
it's tomorrow.
Tomorrow, I mean, going out all weekend. I'm really focused on it. Going out all, the Red Sox lost to the White Sox yesterday. How do you expect me to be? But anyway, you look at what Donald Trump is doing on the eve of the presidential debate, talking about violence, talking about bloody deportations. We're going to have deportations, and they're going to be bloody. Talking about the January 6th rioters as patriots and saying that he's going to get them out of jail. Mocking, once again, Nancy Pelosi's husband getting his head smashed in by somebody that was spouting Trump talking points. We could go down the list, but he is doing that right now. And this whole idea that we see in the media, oh, well, the left wing says this, you know, the right wing says that. The false moral equivalencies, I think, are really laid low. That this is some left wing, right wing thing. When you see Dick Cheney, Liz Cheney, and all of these generals that work for Donald Trump saying the man is unfit to be president.
I am a little discouraged at how the mainstream media is covering the race like you are, Joe. Listen, what he said over the weekend deserves a headline this morning. It deserves a headline. It would get a headline if Kamala Harris said stuff like that.
That's for sure.
It would be a big headline. It would be a shocking development. But because we're used to him behaving like a jerk and, you know, just a sick narcissist, it's almost like everybody, and I'm talking to the editors here and the headline writers. The editors and the headline writers need to, you know, get a grip here and really have a gut check about whether or not they are writing this stuff, and particularly writing headlines in a way that is really reflecting what's going on. And I got to tell you, I got to point out what's going on in Venezuela. You know, most Americans don't understand how easily this could happen. Look what's going on in Venezuela. You had a guy run for president who lost by huge margins. won't release the results, and has now jailed 2,000 people who had the nerve to speak out for the election result that they voted for. And now the person who was on the ballot has fled the country. They got on a plane and went to Spain this weekend. This guy is going to hold on to power even though he lost the election by a landslide, by force, by violence, by jailing people. And I think there's too many people, especially the business leaders on Wall Street, that are being for this guy. Nikki Haley, she knows what can happen in countries when someone decides that the Constitution and rule of law doesn't apply to them. And I just think this is a really scary moment. And all you got to do is look and see what's going on in another country where there's a leader that has the same tendencies as Donald Trump, what's actually happening on the ground.
So I was also in Austin this weekend, as Mark Leibowitz was, for the Texas Tribune Festival, and I was on a panel about how this is so important, talking about the stakes of the election and not just the day-to-day. And John Hammond, you know, I mean, some of it's well-intended, but you're right. There's no question. The media have we improved since 2016? Yes. Are we still making mistakes? Yes, in terms of how we're framing just what this race is about between an insurrectionist candidate and his Democratic opponent. So that leads us into tomorrow night. How does the vice president, in your estimation, how should she talk about the stakes of this election in terms of not just the threat to democracy, which we heard from President Biden a lot, and that's an argument that she's moved away from a little bit, but also this idea of freedom, which seems to be more the center of her campaign?
I don't know how she's going to do it. I mean, I don't mean to say it can't be done. I don't think she can. I'm not saying it can't be done, but I think it's very tricky. And one of the things, obviously, we've seen from her in her thus far very successful general election campaign since she's become the de facto and then the nominee of the party is she has shifted away to some extent from Biden's framing of the Trump democracy. That has not been as central. The threat to democracy that Trump poses, she has shifted towards a more forward-looking rather than a backward-looking argument. When I say backward-looking, I don't mean to say it's wrong. It was the wrong argument on Biden's part, but she has, as you said, Jonathan, she has focused freedom rather than democracy. Those two things are obviously go hand in hand. I do think that, you know, one of the things she wants to do is to both be commanding. This is something that people around her understand, that the way that you win debates is not with zingers and certainly not with policy. In the past, policy is fine. There'll be some discussion of that, but the way that debates, the winners of debates, the way we think about them, is the ones that command the stage in the moment. And we saw, you know, George W. Bush lost the first debate to John Kerry when John Kerry challenged George W. Bush in a way that an incumbent wasn't used to and commanded the stage in that first debate. Obama lost his first debate with Romney in a lot of ways for the same reason. Won his first debate with McCain in that way. You remember those. You remember moments from that. You don't remember zingers from those debates. You just remember that in some respects, there's an impression of command. And part of her job out here is going to be to try to balance all these things of holding Trump accountable while also kind of rising above and sort of saying, this is the failed politics of the past. This is this man, we're done with him. We're over. To be kind of have a light touch about it, but a light touch that also has a certain kind of gravitas. That's a very tricky thing to do. And the last thing I will say is this, which is, you know, it goes back to this moderator question. I have read, I can't tell you how many stories I've read in the last few days, and to Claire's point, about how this debate is all about Kamala Harris. There's a New York Times piece like this, a lot of stories where it's all about her because she is, and this is fair. This part of it is fair. She is not as known a quantity as Donald Trump. There are a lot of Americans in these polls who say they don't know enough about her. They want to know more about her. That is an enormous opportunity for her. It's an enormous opportunity for her to have a game-changing debate if she can allay some people's concerns, fill in blank spots, do all that kind of work. But from the moderator standpoint, you have to be able to ask questions that allow her to do that, challenge her in that area, because that is the central questions, about her, while then focusing on the central questions, as we were talking about earlier on the show, about Donald Trump, which is all of these things that he has done, has been saying just up in these last couple of weeks, jailing political opponents, all the authoritarian things that he's been saying in these recent days. You have to be able to do two things at once. I think these journalists, a good journalist, a good moderator, can do that, but you can't make the debate about Harris or make the debate about Trump. You have to make the debate about what the central questions are facing both candidates. That, I think, is the big challenge for these two moderators tomorrow night.
Yeah, Joe, Mika, to Heilman's point, that New York Times Siena College poll that we talked about at the top of the show does suggest that 28% of likely voters simply want to know more about Harris. They need to know more about her as a person, but her policy issues. And that's fair. She is newer to the stage. People know what they need to know about Donald Trump. But Heilman's right. It can't just be about her. I know she's the fresh face. In many ways, that's an advantage for Democrats, that she is new. She's changed. But the moderators can't just focus on her as the shiny object. They've got to spend time drilling down on Trump's words, his recent words at that.
Yeah, you know, the race is in effect tied. You talked about the New York Times Siena poll, which always tends to be an outlier in favor of Donald Trump. You also had CBS polls yesterday that showed the swing states just a dead heat. They're tied. So the race is tied. So what are you looking for in the debate with Kamala Harris?
I don't feel good about it at all. I'm sorry. She'll be face to face with a convicted felon, a man who has been found liable of massive fraud, a man who knows how to lie so much he ripped so many people off, millions and millions of dollars on top of that, being found liable for sexual abuse in a case that the judge called rape. This is not a good guy. This guy is convicted in a hush money case where he paid off a porn star. He can get anything done. He can say anything. He doesn't follow by any rules. How do you compete against that, especially if you have moderators who are not going to stop disinformation? So you've got this waterfall coming at you, fire hose of falsehoods, and he'll say anything. Anything at all. Nothing is off the table. So how do you compete against that? And in my opinion, he'll be bellowing at her. The mics will be off. You won't hear that. He'll be unchecked repeatedly when he lies. And I fear the questions will act like this is 1978 or something, and we want to talk about policy with each of these candidates, and I fear that he will be sane-washed. By the media.
1996. Mr. Mussolini.
96.
Tell us your trade embargo with Luxembourg. Tell us, Mr. Mussolini, what say you about that? The Italian radio announcer asked. It's a very good question. This race is tied, though. It is close, and I will say, I always love when the New York Times Siena polls come out because it causes a freak out among Democrats, which I think is good, because I think people in the panel would agree with me. I think there's some overconfidence right now in the Democratic Party because how the last month has gone. I wouldn't be either. So that's why I'm saying I'm glad the New York Times Siena poll comes out about once a month, freaks out Democrats, makes them work harder because this race, if you talk to people on the inside of both campaigns, it's a tie. And by the way, people sitting there, their little newsletters or their little cable news shows or their little podcasts going, so-and-so, Donald Trump has a better inside track too. No, he doesn't. No, he doesn't. This race is tied. This race is tied. It could go either way, and that's why the debate tomorrow night, Reverend Al, is so important. Now, you've run for president. You've been part of presidential debates. What are you looking for tomorrow, and how should the candidates prepare?
Well, I think that what they've got to do is clearly Donald Trump will be Donald Trump. I think what Kamala Harris has to do is she has to be able to bring out the policies that she wants to enact as president, defend or state what has already happened under the Biden-Harris administration, deal with inflation, deal with what is going to continue in terms of crime